The night began with good intentions. I had set the table in my dining room, the same oak table Victor and I bought secondhand 30 years ago when we first moved into this house in Tacoma's North End. I told myself this meal could ease the growing tension. Roast chicken, potatoes, green beans, the kind of simple comfort food that used to make Cole light up as a boy. Instead, the air curdled before dessert. Cole leaned back in his chair, his fork clattering against the plate, and his voice cut through the room like a blade. "Mother is just a freeloader," he snapped, his face red, eyes glassy with anger. Across from me, Ariel didn't flinch. She smiled, slow and deliberate, like she'd been waiting for this moment. Her hand rested on Cole's arm as if to steady him, but her eyes glittered with satisfaction. The words should have gutted me. I had raised that boy in this very house, worked double shifts at the port after Victor died to keep the mortgage paid, and cooked more meals at this table than I could count. Instead of breaking, I felt something in me harden. I set my fork down carefully and folded my hands. My voice came out steady, almost quiet, but every syllable was sharp as glass. "You have 24 hours to leave my house." The silence that followed was heavy, almost physical. Cole's mouth opened, but no sound came. Ariel's smile faltered for the first time. Even the clock on the wall seemed to pause. I didn't raise my voice, and I didn't explain. I simply looked at them both, the son I had carried into this world, and the woman who had taught him to sneer at me, and I felt the line draw itself across the floor. The meal sat untouched as I rose and carried my plate to the sink. My hands shook, not from doubt, but from the sudden release of years of swallowed words. Cole muttered something under his breath. Ariel whispered in his ear, but I no longer cared to catch the details. I knew this was only the beginning. Words could wound, but paper, the kind signed and sealed, would have to finish what I had started. After they left the table, I stayed in the kitchen, rinsing dishes that no one had finished. My hands moved automatically, but my mind wandered back to the beginning, to when this house was not just walls, but a promise. Victor and I bought it in 1987, a tired craftsman with peeling paint and a roof that leaked every time the Tacoma rains came heavy. We signed the papers with calloused hands and thin savings, certain only of one thing: we would make it ours. Victor picked up extra shifts on the docks, and I worked weekends clerking at the port, each paycheck carved into mortgage payments, lumber, and gallons of paint. We lived on casseroles and hand-me-down furniture, but we poured our best hours into sanding floors and hammering nails. When Cole was little, he'd sit on the porch steps with a toy hammer, copying his father. I remember the year we tore up the patchy lawn and planted lilacs along the fence. Cole's hands got muddy helping me, his laughter carrying down the street. For a time, the house hummed with family. Then came Victor's stroke. It was sudden, cruel. One minute he was at the kitchen table balancing our budget. The next I was standing in a hospital corridor holding papers I could barely read through tears. He never came home again. The weight of the mortgage fell on me alone. I worked nights, packed Cole's lunches before dawn, and fixed leaky pipes with borrowed tools. Every board, every flower bed, every repair was bought with exhaustion and love. That's why tonight, when Cole hurled those words, I felt more fury than hurt. This house carried my sacrifices, not his, and I would not let that history be rewritten by anyone. Cole and Ariel first came through my door with suitcases and promises. It was supposed to be temporary, a few months while they got on their feet. I told myself it was what any mother would do. The spare room had always been open to him, and I wanted to believe that offering it again meant family still meant something. But months turned into seasons. Their clothes filled closets, their boxes stacked in the basement, Their routines swallowed mine. Ariel carried herself like a guest of honor, not someone living under another's roof. When I asked about rent or utilities, she smiled politely and said, "We'll sort it soon," then turned the subject back to her career plans. The slights began small. At dinner, she'd joke about my retirement pace when I moved slower than her. In the mornings, she made a show of checking her phone while I tried to ask about their bills. Cole laughed along, but the laughter cut sharper than silence. I noticed how he started echoing her words. Where he once thanked me for groceries, now he'd remark that the fridge looked empty. When I reminded him about mowing the lawn, he sighed as if I were nagging. Ariel would glance at him, the corners of her mouth tugging upward. Pleased. The house I had built with Victor's sweat and my own long nights now felt smaller, like I was the intruder. I walked softer, spoke less, tried to keep the peace. But each small dismissal left a mark, invisible but permanent, until the air itself felt thick with unspoken resentment. By the time dinner exploded into accusation, I realized the fracture hadn't been sudden at all. It had been creeping in quietly with every smile Ariel gave and every word Cole chose to repeat. Chapter 4. Quiet Erosion. It wasn't just the bills that weighed on me. It was the constant drip of small indignities. The grocery receipt stretched longer each week, though I rarely saw any of the food I bought. The utility statements crept higher. Lights left on in rooms no one used. Hot showers running long into the night. When the dishwasher broke, I paid for the repair myself. Cole shrugged and said he'd cover it later. Later never came. Ariel found ways to twist even my efforts into faults. She stood in the kitchen one evening, arms crossed, declaring the cabinets were outdated. "If you want this house to hold value, you need to modernize," she said. Glancing at Cole for agreement, I bit my tongue. That kitchen had seen decades of meals and memories. It didn't need her approval. Laundry baskets appeared outside their door, sometimes overflowing, as if I'd become the housekeeper by default. I folded their clothes out of habit, but each shirt I stacked pressed a little harder against my patience. One afternoon, while I trimmed the lilacs out front, Cap leaned on the fence. His voice was low, measured. Generosity without edges turns into surrender. "Eve, you know that." His words stung because they rang true. That night, I sat at the dining table with pen and paper, drafting a rent agreement. It was practical, fair a way to restore balance, but as I read the words, I hesitated. Setting it in front of them felt like drawing battle lines, and I wasn't sure I was ready for the fight. I folded the paper, slid it into a drawer, and told myself I'd bring it up later. Later never came, and the silence I kept only deepened their sense of entitlement. The conversation began on a Sunday afternoon when I found Cole spread out at the dining table with loose papers and a laptop. Ariel hovered behind him, her arms folded like she was guarding treasure. "Mom," Cole started, voice too casual. "I've got a new venture lined up. Contracting, renovations around the Narrows. The market's hot, and I just need a little bridge money to get going." He tapped the papers like they were proof. How much, I asked, though I already dreaded the answer. $20,000, Ariel said crisply. Before Cole could, she leaned in. "It's not just for him. It's an investment for the family. Everyone wins." I felt my chest tighten. "Cole, I live on my pension and savings. That money isn't lying around. I've budgeted carefully for my retirement. I can't bankroll a business." He frowned, but Ariel smiled, slow and sharp. "If you live here too, it's only fair you contribute. Family pulls its weight." The audacity of her words stunned me. I stared at her, then at my son, who didn't flinch or correct her. My mind raced back to decades of mortgages paid, meals cooked, and nights I'd worked so he could have clothes for school. And now, standing in my own dining room, I was being told to contribute. I pushed back from the table, steadying my voice. No. My answer is no. Cole muttered about me being stubborn, and Ariel gave me that knowing smirk, as if she'd already won the long game. That evening, I called Renee. She listened without interruption as I laid it all out, the demand, the smirk, the twisting of words. When I finished, her reply was blunt. Eve, this only ends when you draw a line, not with talk, but with action. Otherwise, they'll keep taking until there's nothing left. Her words lingered long after I hung up, louder than the house itself, pressing me toward a reckoning I could no longer avoid. The night it all came apart was meant to look ordinary. I roasted chicken, set out potatoes, and tried to believe a shared meal might ease the strain. Cole arrived late, Ariel at his side, her perfume sharp as if she'd stepped straight out of a showroom. They sat down, and for a few minutes we spoke about nothing: the weather, traffic on I-5, the Mariners' latest loss. I clung to that small stretch of civility, though I knew it couldn't last. Cole was the first to break. He set down his fork with a clang, leaned forward, and his words came out like a blow. Mother is just a freeloader. The room seemed to tilt. Ariel didn't gasp or scold him. She smiled, thin and satisfied, as though the insult had been rehearsed. I felt something rise in me, not shock anymore, but resolve. I folded my hands on the table and spoke evenly. You have 24 hours to leave my house. For a moment, silence thickened the air. Then Cole slammed his fist on the wood, rattling the silverware. You don't mean that. After everything I've done for you, you dare talk to me like this. I met his anger with calm. Everything you've done for me. My voice stayed quiet. Look around this house. Every board, every brick, every bill, I carried it. You do not get to call me a freeloader under my own roof. Ariel tilted her head, mocking. Maybe we should remind her how much we've carried since moving in. That was the final twist of the knife. My hands trembled beneath the table, but my words did not. You'll be out tomorrow. I won't argue, and I won't ask again. Cole muttered curses under his breath, Ariel whispering in his ear, both of them seething. But I had drawn the line, and I knew this fight was no longer about bruised feelings at a dinner table. It had crossed into something larger, something that would require paper, signatures, and the weight of law. I gathered the plates, stacked them at the sink, and steadied myself for what I already knew was coming next. The morning after that dinner, I called Renee. My voice was steady but flat, as though I had finally stepped off a cliff I'd been circling for years. She didn't waste time with sympathy. You need to make this official, she said. I'll connect you with someone who knows housing law inside and out. By noon, she had me sitting across from Lydia Montrose, a housing attorney whose calm presence steadied me more than coffee ever could. She listened as I explained, then leaned forward with her pen tapping against a legal pad. This isn't about emotions anymore. Mrs. Ransom, you're the owner. Washington law requires notice, and we'll start with a 20-day notice to vacate. If they don't leave, we'll escalate. When Lydia slid the document across the desk, the black print carried more weight than any argument I'd ever had with Cole. I signed my name with a hand that no longer trembled. Serving it was another matter. I placed the envelope on the dining table that evening, my heart pounding like I was betraying my own child. Cole scowled. Ariel tore it open, skimmed the first lines, and laughed bitterly. You think this means anything? You've been living off us for months. Everyone knows it. She made sure of that within hours. A post appeared on her social media, complete with a picture of our front porch, supporting an elderly mother who refuses to pull her weight. Pray for us while she threatens to throw us out. The comments poured in, strangers clucking their tongues, friends of theirs offering sympathy. But then Cap chimed in. He wrote plainly, "I've lived next door for 20 years. Eveline has carried that house on her back. Don't twist the truth." His words cut through the noise, a single voice of reason in a sea of performance. I didn't reply online. Instead, I opened a file folder and began tucking in every utility bill I'd paid, every grocery receipt, every text where Cole promised to cover something and didn't. Each piece of paper felt like a brick stacking into a wall. For the first time, I felt shielded not by loyalty or maternal hope, but by proof. Love had failed to protect me. Paper, I realized, might succeed. The notice sat on the counter like a scar neither of them could ignore, but they refused to acknowledge it. Each day that passed without a word of preparation was its own kind of defiance. Instead of packing, they grew louder, doors slamming, television blaring. Laughter stretched too long into the night, as though to prove they still held control. Ariel made sure to carry the fight outside my walls. One Saturday, while I was pruning the lilacs, she leaned against the porch railing and said loudly enough for the neighbors to hear, "Imagine being thrown out by your own mother-in-law. What kind of person does that?" A couple walking their dog slowed, their eyes flicking toward me. Ariel smiled sweetly, basking in their sympathy. I kept trimming, but my cheeks burned. Later, Cap stopped by. "Don't let her performance fool you," he said. "We've all seen who pays the bills around here." His reassurance steadied me, but the sting of public humiliation lingered. I tried, one last time, to soften the blow. I sat them both down and offered $500 to cover moving costs and a storage unit for a month. My voice was calm, deliberate. This is not punishment. It's a chance to move forward with dignity. Ariel laughed outright. $500. That won't even cover movers. Keep your charity. Cole stared at the table, silent. But his silence spoke as loudly as her contempt. When I told Lydia what happened, she nodded once. "Then we escalate. I'll file for unlawful detainer. The court will decide. Not them." Her tone was cool, professional, but it carried the weight of inevitability. That evening, I poured tea at the kitchen table while Renee sat across from me. She leaned forward, her eyes sharp. They'll try to turn pity into a weapon. Every story, every tear, will be spun against you. You need to be ready for that. I folded my hands around the mug, feeling the warmth seep into my palms. "I am," I said, and for the first time, I meant it. The house felt quieter that night, though not peaceful. It was the hush before a storm, and I knew the storm would break in a courtroom. The courthouse in downtown Tacoma smelled faintly of varnish and paper, the kind of place where lives were redrawn in ink. I sat at the petitioner's table beside Lydia, my folder of bills and receipts neatly stacked. Across the aisle, Cole shifted uncomfortably in his suit jacket. Ariel perched straight-backed beside him, her chin tilted high. When the judge called the case, Lydia spoke with quiet precision. She laid out the utility bills in my name, the grocery receipts I'd covered, and the texts where Cole promised repayment but never delivered. Then she handed up printed copies of Ariel's posts, the ones claiming I lived off them. The judge's brow furrowed as he read. Cole tried to interject, but his words tangled. Ariel muttered about family loyalty, but the judge cut her off. "This is not about sentiment. It is about possession and payment." The gavel fell with a single, decisive crack. Judgment for the petitioner. Possession is returned to Ms. Ransom. The tenants must vacate by the ordered date. Sheriff's enforcement will follow if they do not comply. The words rang like finality. Yet all I felt was a hollow ache in my chest. Outside on the courthouse steps, I reached into my bag and pulled out a small box photographs, a toy car, a few school drawings. I held it out to Cole. He looked at me, jaw clenched, but said nothing as he took it. His signature on the move-out order was quick, almost angry. The pen scratching hard against the paper. I didn't argue, didn't explain. I simply turned toward the parking lot, my steps slow but steady, already thinking of the house that awaited me, and the silence that would greet me there. When the last of their boxes left and the door clicked shut behind them, the house exhaled. The silence felt strange at first, too sharp, like walking into a church after the congregation had gone. I stood in the entryway, my hand brushing the wall where Victor once leaned, and let the emptiness settle around me. The next morning, I took to repairing what they had left behind. The banister on the staircase bore a deep scuff from a careless box. I sanded it gently, smoothed the wood, and restained it, watching the mark fade until it blended back into the hole. It was slow work, but each stroke felt like reclaiming the house piece by piece. Outside, the lilacs had grown wild. I trimmed them back, replanted the garden beds with pansies and tulips, and pulled weeds that had been ignored for too long. Neighbors passed by, offering quiet smiles, but no one asked questions. They didn't need to. The sight of me kneeling in the soil said enough. Later, in the kitchen, I brewed coffee just for myself. The steam rose steady, curling against the morning light. I sat at the table, the same oak table that had carried every fight, every meal, every silence, and I let the stillness wash through me. Motherhood had shaped me, but it was never meant to chain me. Servitude was not love, and respect was not optional. Without those things, family was only a word, hollow and sharp. That evening, I picked up my phone and typed a single line to Cole. "When you're ready to speak with respect, I will listen." I set the phone down. No reply came. I walked to the front door, turned the lock, and felt something I hadn't in years, peace settling into the bones of the house, as sure as sunrise.